Welcome today to Dr. Alberto Urrutia-Moldes. Alberto holds a PhD in prison architecture from the University of Sheffield. He's a lecturer in construction in the partnership programme of the University of Bath Spa and GBS in Manchester. He's also a lecturer in prison built environment at the Centre for Public Innovation in Latin America, and an international consultant in prison architecture. As a consultant, he's currently working on the evaluation of carceral conditions and their alignment with the Nelson Mandela Rules in the prison services of Bolivia and Honduras. So Alberto left Chile in 2014 to start studies of his PhD in the UK, and he conducted a cross-continental study in prison architecture, which is the base of his book, recently published by Routledge, called Health and Wellbeing in Prison Design, a Theory for Prison Systems and a Framework for Evolution. Welcome, Alberto.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, we're really delighted to get you on, Alberto. You came highly recommended by Dominique as someone who would make a great guest, and I really enjoyed the book chapters that you sent us to read, so thank you for those. Alberto, before we get started, can you describe your career pathway for us? How did you come to be specialising in the study of prison architecture, and are there many people specialising in this?
Well, I start my career as a construction engineer in Chile, working in the private sector for 5 years, and after that I started working in the prison service in Chile. I really didn't know what I was going to face in the prison service, and when I accept to work there. And it was quite an experience because I was very used to work with a high level of budget building buildings, and the prison service at that point had a very low budget for maintenance of all the 24 prison facilities that I was in charge in the maintenance and refurbishing. So I faced a very bad situation in terms of how people live in prison, how not only people that are imprisoned, but also staff. So from the beginning was challenging to try to improve the situation in the prison, in the region of Chile that I was working. So far, it was okay. I didn't have many complications with that. A perspective of prisons from a new professional in the area working there until around 2004, when somebody that I knew very well was sent to prison, to one of the prisons that I was in charge of the maintenance and the refurbishings. And I experienced how this person was really not only affected, of course, for being sent to prison, for being in touch with the criminal system, but also how the buildings and the built environment plays against his own health and his own sanity. So I witnesses how somebody that I knew was really damaged by the prison conditions, and that was kind of a big bell sounding an alarm. So from this moment, I started to try to understand how really improve the system. In 2011, I organized with the University of Bio Bio in Concepción in Chile, the first conference in prison design and prison architecture held in Chile. And at that point, it was an international conference. We invite people from Latin America. But I realized that Latin America, we were all in the same boat, in the same kind of prison conditions, bad prison conditions, overcrowding, and without a clear north in our compass about where to go with the design. So that was the trigger for me to try to find out how to improve the system, and I decided to apply for a scholarship in Chile to study in England, to study prison architecture, and that's how I came here. Yeah, there is no much architects or designers work in research in prison architecture. I have been in touch with some of the few people that are from the area of architecture working in this. I know an architect in Australia, for example. I know there is one architect in the University of West London, Elena Pombares, who is researching in architecture for women prison. There is an Italian architect, three Italian architects that I know that are researching the area, and one architect in Romania who is not really now researching in architecture, but she she made a study, a very, very good study that I consider and I took like the basis for my research, which is Adina Boldan. So yeah, there is no much people working in the area, and it's really needed.
It sounds very, very niche, and yet, of course, we build so many prisons, don't we? I was curious about why you chose to come to England rather than, say, the Netherlands or Scandinavia, where they might have a different attitude towards incarceration.
Well, it was quite a journey. I applied. No, I was looking for where to study. I looked for universities in Australia. I looked for universities in the United States, and I looked at universities here in the UK. UK have a tradition of, or has the history of being the first country in, doing a very big change on how imprisonment is considered and how built and designed prisons. So my decision was made a bit with lack of knowledge of how is because there is no really maybe today it is, but 6 years ago there wasn't in Chile very well knowledge about where to go to study architecture in prisons.
Thank you. And I think as you're talking, it kind of like raises the issue if there's so few people studying it, and yet we build worldwide, so many prisons are built. It raises an issue about the morality of prisons. And one of the things I enjoyed about your book was seeing how much moral philosophy you draw upon, and and thinking about what's the moral context for designing prisons, are the common moral principles that architects of prisons should adhere to.
Yeah, well, in my book, I started to put in the basis, the moral basis of the book, and second chapter. I based my research in a theory of well-being, which analyze not only well, well-being is a subjective experience, but it can be measured. So I use a theory that has been proved being a good theory to measure well-being, which is PERMA theory. And my initial point of view was that if we will build prisons and we will say that prison could help us as a society, we have to start thinking that prison should promote health and well-being. It should promote each of the perma components of well-being, which is positive emotions, engagement, generate relationship, good relationship between people, to promote meaning in every single detail that we design, and provide accomplishment for people. So prison should be designed to promote health and well-being, not only insist in people that is sent to prison, but also in people who worked in prison, who at the end of the day is the prison is the people that have more time inside prison, more even than people imprisoned. So yeah, that's the first point. And then my second position is that prisons should promote rehabilitation, not only health and well-being, but they should promote rehabilitation, whatever you want to call it, or rehabilitation, or social reinsertion, or promote criminal disengagement. And as a third principle, I said that prison, when are designed and were built, it has to be built, consider both initial points, I mean, designing for health and well-being and designing for rehabilitation, as a matter of public policy, and not giving the decision just to each architect in each project.
Thank you. And I think as you were talking, I suppose in some ways those factors sound like principles that architects of any kind of public buildings might have to consider. If certainly there's sort of health and well-being, I imagine, and maybe if rehab was focused on assisting people to reintegrate in society. But are there other what kind of variables and principles do architects have to think about ordinarily if they were designing public buildings more generally?
Well, when we are designing any public building, there are many typical elements that is needed to consider from the, I would say, practical elements that are related with how to provide the accommodation or in terms of other buildings, in how to provide the minimum elements that each objective of the building required. If we are talking about hospitals, for example, how to provide good accommodation with space, with lighting. In case of schools or educational areas, the decisions and the design has to be aligned with the purpose of the building, which is make the best physical condition possible in order to help the people to learn. In case of if we are designing an office that will receive public, we will take a look carefully to the objective of that building or that institution. And that is kind of the problem with prisons. When we analyze the objectives of prison, that is a very blurry scenario. I mean,
Yes, I mean, it seems as though the kind of like the functions of prisons are a bit at odds with each other, like, you know, partly about safety and keeping people off the streets, partly about rehabilitation, and then the public often, I think, also wanting to see punishment. I was curious about how you personally balance the functions, the many functions that are there for prisons.
Well, you are absolutely right. Prisons, the problem with prisons is that there are too many objectives, and many of them are contradictory. And because of that, it's really difficult to say, okay, we will design this or build this prison to fulfill the objective, because maybe it will go against another objective. How I managed, I am very practical. Well, you know, my background is engineer. I studied construction engineer first, and then I went for another bachelor in industrial engineer. So I'm very practical and say, okay, the building has to fulfill the more important objective. And the objective should be something that we all agree, that prison has to have a purpose, a real useful purpose for society. Not to punish people just to punish, but thinking that those people are crossing a pathway, they are in a process to being transformed, if you want, in a human being valuable for society. So if we don't look, if we cannot do that, prisons really doesn't make any sense to have prisons for me. So I expect a prison to be built, to be designed, each decision be made looking at how this decision, this design can help us to reach that goal.
As you were talking just then and also earlier, I wondered, Alberto, whether you seem to be saying there's kind of like a moral responsibility for the people who are responsible for building prisons, so governments and the commissioners of these, to be thinking about some of these questions about what the function of the prison is for in terms of the purpose of the architect and what some of the principles should be. Have I got that right in terms of your thinking?
Yeah, well, there is in what I have found in my research is that there is, in different countries, there is different way of interact between architects and authorities, prison authorities, when design prisons. And this is one of the aspects that we have to take in consideration when we, as a researcher, as a professionals in the area, make any proposition. We cannot be very open to plan to give one proposition that could be applied everywhere, because there are fundamental differences between countries, between criminal systems, and between also personal perspective, so societal perspective through our imprisonment. So it has to be considered all these aspects. I took those differences, and my first complication in doing international research in prison was that one. Was okay. Well, I want to understand how to build a good prison, how to design a good prison, but why there is so many differences in how prison is understood in each country, and how this will affect me to find a solution. It pushed me to create some tool in order to understand these differences and try to manage and grasp them well. So is why when I read a research made for Adina Moldan, that she proposed a classification of prison buildings in terms of 4 different type of buildings. I use the classification, and I create and proposed in my book a theory of prison models. Not only classify the building, but understand that they are different ideal models of prison systems, including the buildings, including the prison organization, and the objectives that each organization have. I want to show you here what I am talking about. When I create this theory, I identify 3 different dimensions, which is they are present in every prison service. They are always together, and at some point one dimension could be very minimal and another could be very big, like the security dimension, which is related with avoid the escape and generate safe environments for the staff and prevent a riot, for example. The punitive dimension that is more related with punishment, with make feel the people that is sent to prison that they are being punished, and try to generate some idea to the rest of the people that if they behave in the same way, they will be punished. And the 3rd dimension that is rehabilitation, which is change behavior of people to help people that have not been have not had good conditions to grow as a person, in order to make them better citizens. So based on these dimensions, I defined 3 basic models of prison systems. The security model, which is the prison system that is focused in avoiding escape and avoid riots. The rehabilitation model, which is focused in create rehabilitation, in transform people, and the repressive model, which is more focused in punishment and in make the inmates or the prisoners feel that they are there being punished. I have to make I have to say that these are ideal models. I mean, there is no prison service that is exactly just rehabilitation model or just a security or just repressive. These are ideal models in order to measure how far or how near every prison service is from them. So I also identify that is some a common area in the middle where a prison service could have exactly the same level of security, rehabilitation, and repression at the same time. And that is called the hybrid model. So with this framework, we can identify different prison services and identify how far of how close they are from the ideal. That's a tool that I use to understand why we have, for example, the North American United States prison services are really focused in security, in avoid riots, in avoid escape. They also have rehabilitation. They have, but this is not their first objective. In prisons like many countries in Africa or Middle East, that repression is and the avoidance of human rights is part of the process of imprisonment. They are more related with repressive model. The Scandinavian, for example, they are more related with rehabilitation. The first objective is change of behavior and recover a person as a good member of the society. And there are a group, very important group of countries that they love the system, the American system of security, and they want to be like that system, but they don't have the money to implement this system because it's very expensive. They have still repressive elements. You can see easily in those kinds of countries that human rights are violated inside prisons. But they talk about rehabilitation as the objective of the prison service, but they don't have the money, neither the intention to really invest in rehabilitation. So those countries are more focused in the hybrid model. And I would say in the hybrid model, most, if not all, the Latin American countries are in the near to that model.
It's very interesting to see this, Alberto, to see your model, and would encourage any listeners to check out the YouTube video in order to see any of the pictures you're describing. But I suppose as what your model makes clear is that for somebody being tasked with designing a prison, it's really important to understand what those priorities are, because actually you could end up designing something that actually fits with a very different set of priorities. But I also wondered, does it cause an internal moral conflict for you in terms of, which of the prisons would you ideally be designing, and what if you were asked to design a prison that was only on the, was primarily on the repressive model, for instance, and whether you'd be comfortable with that?
I don't think I have any conflict of principles. I mean, I made very clear in the book that my intention is to find a way how the security model and the hybrid model can evolve toward a rehabilitation model. I said clearly that my ideal is that, I mean, that prisons should be a rehabilitation and therapeutic environment. I didn't consider in my research the repressive model because of the incongruences between a repressive environment and the promotion of health and well-being. So I did visit prisons in the hybrid model. I mean, in Chile, I visit prisons in the United States, in different states of the United States, but I mainly in Kentucky, and also visit prisons in Scandinavia, in Norway and Finland, to understand how the other models can evolve toward a rehabilitation model, and what in the Scandinavian prison services, what they did to be transformed, because they have not been like that forever. There is a change in paradigm in Scandinavia around the 1960s that start in the years that are the responsible for what the Scandinavian prison service are today. So my intentions was first understand how they evolved in order to try to understand how we can evolve.
Thank you. It seems to me, looking at your diagram, that you're talking about a hybrid model in another sense as well, because you're talking about not just the physical characteristics of the building, but you're talking about the development of a culture, within those walls. And at what point does the architect or somebody like yourself get involved with engaging with the commissioners of the project to produce the particular outcome?
Well, it's complicated when you are inside the prison service in a hybrid model, for example. These prison services used to hire architects or designers to work for them, which I don't think is the best situation for improve the system. In the case of the security model, they hire architect offices, external architect offices that have experience designing prisons. But again, they are a third part that they are being paid to create this environment. I know in the United States, architects are very keen to improve the system, and they are always trying to convince their commissioners in terms of implementing some increasing the quantity of light, for example, natural light, or increasing the amount of vegetation inside the built environments. But at the end of the day, it depends on the commissioners. And I think that is the main problem as in our systems, that the decisions are made by the same prison service, and because of in the United States, for example, the main issue that architects and also the prison staff, the high-level prison staff, told me that they feel that there is a huge lack of education and knowledge from the people that give the money for constructing prisons. So they just make decisions based on economic factors and not based on how they will affect finally to the users. And the same thing in the hybrid model in Chile, architects and authorities used to say that there is a lack of commitment from who make the order to build or design a prison. There is lack of knowledge about how the prison affect the people. But in both cases, we have this situation that we are all involved in the problem. They are too close of the problem. What I found in the rehabilitation model that was really enlightening, both in Norway and Finland, and I know also in other countries in Scandinavia, is that they had a very clear differentiation of who administrate the prison system, which is the prison service, who owns the building, which is also a governmental institution, but it's not the prison service, and who and who design it. And in this case, the second or the other institution normally is the one that owns the building and is responsible for the maintenance of the building, and is responsible for that the building has to fulfill the institutional purpose of the prison service. So there is a close relation with them in terms of create a good product that help the prison service to its purpose, but also there is responsibility of maintenance and responsibility of maintain the value of the the building from the part of this third-party institution. That is, I think, it's one of the important things that I learned from the rehabilitation model, that we should try to take a careful look how it worked, because for them it's worked very well.
But I think there are other factors that come into play, aren't there? I was thinking earlier on in the conversation about private prisons. And of course, most of our prisons in this country used to be private prisons, and often quite small. I was listening to a lecture about one of our poets, John Donne, who for a short period was locked up in a private prison in, I think it was Fleet Street in London. But then political times changed, and then most of our prisons were owned and run by the state. And now, of course, the state wants to privatize, quite a lot of our prisons. And it seems to me that the state does this, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, the state likes to privatize things when it wants to abdicate from some responsibility for rehabilitation, for those softer parts of the prison service. Would you agree?
Yeah, I agree. And I think the problem with privatization is not the concept itself. I mean, if you think, if you are externalizing services of the government, it's not bad. It's not bad itself. The problem with prisons, well, I have to make the differentiation between private prisons and concession prisons, because here in the UK we have private prisons. In countries like Chile, also I think in Australia, you have concession prisons. I mean, the private sector build the prison, but the prison is run by the prison service, and the private sector is responsible for maintenance of the prison, for providing services like food, like even rehabilitation programs, like I don't know, maintain clean the clothes of the people that are there. So laundry services. So there is a difference, practical difference between private and concession. But in both cases, I think the most complicated thing is how to measure and where to put the incentives for the business, because at the end it's a business. If you pay by the quantity of people that is in prison, is a really dangerous way of put the incentives in quantity of people imprisoned So at the end, the bigger the number of prisoners that you have, the more money you will obtain as a company. And the problem at least in the Chilean prison service that I studied and I know more closely, it was that the incentives were placed in the wrong place. So today, the prison service is not in the concession prisons in Chile, that there are 7, 8 concession prisons. They're not only, they are good environments, but they are really expensive for the government because of the incentive was placed in the wrong place. And they are not really better system than the traditional prisons in terms of rehabilitation, in terms of well-being.
Thank you. So there is a big emphasis in our prison service, at any rate, about trying to be trauma informed at the moment. But this can really only be effective if people feel safe. What kind of contribution can people like yourself make to this?
Well, if we can create prisons that are safe and prisons that people who live there feel safe, we will create an environment in which we can start thinking about being therapeutic. There is, for example, a research made in the United States that said that the place inside the prison where the inmates feel more unsafe is the showers. So if we can understand where people feel unsafe and why, we can try to improve that situations. Now, in that case, it's not just it's not as simple as an architectural solution. It's not as simple as putting a wall or putting a window or putting even a camera. It has to be understood as a system in terms of complexity, in terms of there are many relations between elements that has to be considered. And this has been very well understood by a concept of dynamic security applied by the mainly by rehabilitation model prison services, in which the security of the prison itself depends not only on very basically in terms of the physical thing, but in how prisoners are treated by the staff, how they feel in terms of staying with somebody that is helping you, is coaching you, or somebody that is just guarding you. It's a system that required a lot of more people working in the system. It's expensive because it's very human resources demanding. But at the end have been proved somehow that is going in the right direction. If you see, for example, the Norwegian prison model, they have around one staff per inmates. In the same case in Finlandia, but they have really low levels of people going to back to prison. So it has prove that it is, I don't know, I will not say the solution, but they are pointing to the right north.
Can I ask you, Alberto, so in your model, would that account for action that might be taken for one reason, but might actually have another consequence? So I'm just thinking, for instance, about Dominique Moran's work on green space, which on the face of it might appear to be a well-being kind of initiative, but actually leads to lower levels of self-harm and violence if prisons have more green space. So the intention might actually be about rehab, but actually might contribute to a more secure prison in the sense of there's more safety there.
I will say that we have to be very professional. You will expect that prison services are very professional in terms of putting the right people in the right place. But normally in the world, you can see that prison is applied as the only solution for many problems. Even psychological problems, the United States has today very, very big problems because prisons are receiving people that are not being treated for psychological problems because their healthcare system in that part is not working well. Same in Latin America, we don't have many psychiatric hospitals, and at the end is the prison that is receiving all this kind of population. So if it's as a society, we don't understand that you have to have the right institution for the right person. The prison will not work anyway. So I want to show you, for example, this is one photography of a Chilean prison. Is the big one of the biggest prisons in Santiago de Chile. Is the oldest prison in the country, built in the 1860s, 1840s, and still working. It was designed for 600, 700 people, and without much increasing in built surface. Today it has 4,000 people.
I wonder, Alberto, if you could just describe it a little bit for people who are listening to the podcast only as an auditory thing, whether you could just pull out the key features that you think are distinctive in this picture.
What you see in prisons in Latin America is, first of all, very old buildings with a lot of problems of maintenance because the prison services have to run with very low level of budget and almost nothing in terms of budget for refurbishing or for maintenance. So you have many problems of sewage problem, for example, or humidity inside the building. Windows are normally very small and full of bars and metal mesh to avoid the people to escape from the cell, because they are built this with considering a design that will maintain them in the closed space as long as possible. We have spaces very crowded, very overcrowded, with places that can have, I would say, in this prison, for example, in the Santiago Sur prison, you can have spaces with less than 1 square meter per person, which is horrible if you think you are if you are normally with people that you don't know. Well, even in a crowded house, you can't really imagine 1 people per square meter. If you analyze what's the kind of prisons that we have in the United States, and this, if you understand that as a country that is most close to the security prison model, we will see if prisons like, for example, the Chicago Metropolitan Correctional Center, which is a building of I don't know, 27 stores, which is a fortress with very little windows, and each floor is a different section of the prison. Inmates there have very little contact with sunlight or with fresh air. And this is a prison that is in the middle of a huge city with a lot of sky-rise buildings. But inside is very similar to what is shown the New Orleans County Jail. I mean, a triangular building with cells in each side. And when people is inside the building, the 24 hours a day, and they have contact with nature that they have is just fresh air, some sunlight. And that's it. And they are there 24 hours a day.
Chicago prison looks quite doesn't look very safe to me. How you kind of think that when it's effectively a small skyscraper, I guess, and I suppose you think, well, if there was disturbance in one part of the prison lower down the prison, that would potentially pose problems for every layer above that.
Exactly. And now they are treated as different prisons at the end of the day. They are like enclosed, like clusters, each part of the building. So they can isolate problems. But anyway, it's like living inside a pressure kettle.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't really enjoy anything about life. So you can see and understand why there are so many psychological problems in prisons in this kind of buildings. On the other hand, if you go to traditional prisons in the US, you can find a lot of very heavy metal doors and elements that are visually aggressive and are telling you a clear message that you are dangerous for us. And
those cells very much give the impression of animals in cages, don't they? The fact there's no privacy whatsoever.
Exactly.
In those spaces.
Exactly. Now, if we analyze what the Scandinavians are proposing as a new understanding of prison, is dividing the prisons areas in small areas, just like the Americans did in terms of dividing by floors, like in Chicago. But each area has to be managed as a little society, and they do not accept more than 12 persons living in each section, for example, and they have to understand how to live in community. They have to prepare their own food. They have to they have recreation areas inside. They have the kitchenette and Of course, each one of them has the room with the bathroom. And they live there, but they have to go outside to another place to work or to study or to go for doing sport or worship in a daily basis. So the idea of the prison service is create a routine of normality as being living a normal life. And this picture that I will show here is one of prison in Norway, in Bergen, which was built in 1990s. And you can see it's a village surrounded by a big wall, but it's a village inside, a village that is separated by security areas in which people are passing through different levels of security depending on the level of improvement that they can show in the process. And inside, it's like living in a small village. The same is the same concept that they create here in the 1990s was used to create the most modern or the first most modern prison that they built in nearby Oslo, which is Halden Prison. You can see the Halden Prison is again a village surrounded by a big wall, but inside they have the number one, which is the administration area, and the spaces for living for inmates to live, like number 2, 5, or 6. And also they have separately the area in which they teach the people that is living there. They have a workshop to teach them not only in terms of education, formal education, but also training them in jobs that are demanded in the society, and not any job. They select jobs that are useful in society. And you have a little visitor center where the people can receive their families, their wife, or their partner and child. And outside the prison, they have a halfway houses. So it's again a process of, okay, if you are doing well here, you will go to a halfway houses outside the prison. This is an area, for example, in the administrative area, where staff used to have lunch or dinner, and it is an area built with the Scandinavian standard. And what always have been said to my colleagues and people that is listening any talk that I talk to Latin America, you cannot expect to copy the standard from Scandinavia. You have to understand that that is their standard, and that is the normal way of living there. We in Chile or Colombia or Peru, we have another standard, another normality. And I say that because when we are looking, for example, to the areas where people is going to study or work, this is a area, for example, where they are for is the chapel of the prison, where people can go there and um, pray in whatever is your belief. They have beautiful libraries with a lot of information, a lot of type of book. That is a really important part of the process of rehabilitation or socialization. They have, for example, this is what is very controversial area in terms of, they have a music and film laboratory in which they teach people things related with music, with production, with filming. So they have very good stuff. It's a rich country, nobody can say anything about that, but they are teaching something that the people that is living there will use when they are outside. You can see in every part the use of architectural features, like taking advantage of daylight, taking advantage of beauty in every element that they design. The ceiling that is shown in that picture are elements that are soundproof, that help to create an environment that is not noisy, because noise is one of the main problems in many prison services. People that is in prison have to walk every day for this path to go to work, to go to study, to go to the gym, for example. So they are forced to have a normal life. And what staff told me many times in Norway is one staff told me, we know that many of those people maybe don't have the possibility to have a bed or to understand how to cook. So here they have to learn how to live a good life. If we look at what in other prison services could be called cells, here are rooms. Rooms with furniture made with wood. Though all those furnitures are created and built by the prison service with a specific, very, very complicated way of assembling in order to make it very difficult to disassemble. But if you look at the bed, if you look at the desk, you are looking at normal building, normal furniture. So people who is there, even though it's in an environment that in the beneath is very secure, it doesn't look a secure a fortress.
In these recent photos that you've been showing us, Alberto, you can see that a good architect has had input there, and they remind me really, because this is hospital standard accommodation. This is what we would find in some of our forensic hospitals. And I suppose then the next question that we're probably not going to answer today is, why are there these differing standards? What are the political and the social forces at play that leads to this big disparity? Wouldn't you agree with that, Naomi?
Yeah, absolutely. It's quite interesting to see, isn't it?
Mm.
Well, the problem, I will say, is that in some places, in some countries, there are no standards. In Latin America, for example, only Brazil and Argentina, they have standards for prison design, and Argentina had standard from prison design since 2020. So I think the problem is that there are not standards, and when there are not standards to obey by, you leave the door open to the prison service to design whatever they want in order to use their financial resources that they have. That's why I learned from the United States, for example, that even though they have this very harsh environment, the improvements that the prison services in the United States have faced, most of them are because the prison services have faced demands in courts. So because the standards in the United States are not made for or by the prison services, they are made by the the American Correctional Association, for example, is one of them. They are optionals for the prison services, but when they decide to use them, they are mandatory. So they have faced a lot of court sues, and because of that, they are improving the system.
Really interesting to see all these images and hear you talking in such a thoughtful way about your work, Alberto. I'm just conscious that we're coming to the end of time. It's obvious that you spend a lot of time immersed in thinking about how you can best contribute to the well-being of people who are imprisoned, and even sharing that kind of early experience of your friend or contact who was imprisoned. How have you looked after your own well-being during this process and seeing these different places and immersing yourself in people's stories?
Well, researching in prison and even working in prison is very, very emotionally demanding. And I think I try to take care of myself, being very clear in creating a boundary between my professional interest and my personal interest. Before visiting Scandinavia, my way of dealing with this environment were only just being clear that when I am working on that, I'm working on that. But when I am out of it, I go outside, I visiting. I love photography. I go to the cities and take photographies of the buildings, of the people, talking with people with no relation with prisons. When I visit Scandinavia, Scandinavian prisons, I think it was also even better in terms of having a north in my personal compass. I mean, okay, this is something that they are doing something really good, and somehow is working very well. Of course, as every system, they have faults, but there is something that they are doing that should be done everywhere. They are understanding the people that is in prison as a people that is is worth for society, that as a person that face another different situations, different problems that lead them there, but they are recovering people. And all this way of understanding imprisonment helped me to have a possible better way of understanding imprisonment. And it's quite exciting to see how different countries today are looking at Scandinavia. The UK is designing the new prisons that are designing. We can disagree in some things, but they are including a lot of Scandinavian concepts in their design.
Good to hear. Thank you so much, Alberto. It's been a really fascinating conversation. Thank you for sharing those photos with us. I can hardly believe that's a prison cell, prison room with that lovely view out the window.
Yeah, great to meet you, and thanks for your time.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you. Let's stop the recording. I think I need to reclaim the host, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Right, let's see. Oh, you might need to do that for me, Alberto. I think you might have to.
How?
If you click on the three, there should be 3 dots on your picture.
In my picture, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you should have the option of making somebody else the host, I think.
Spotlight for everyone, or I have mute my audio, stop video, rename pin, spotlight for everyone, and hide self view. That's the options that I have.
Oh no, that's so I can't seem to get.
I can stop recording here.
If you can stop recording, that would be great. Thank you.